The words hit Steve Harvey like a freight train, stopping him mid-sentence as he processed what he'd just heard. A 14-year-old boy had just told a television studio full of people that he shouldn't be there because he had work to do. Not homework. Work. The cameras kept rolling, but something fundamental had shifted in the Family Feud studio. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was the moment when America would witness what happens when childhood gets stolen, and what one man would do to give it back. It started as another Tuesday afternoon taping in Atlanta. The Rodriguez family from Houston faced off against the Chen family from San Francisco. Standard energy, standard competition, standard Steve Harvey magic working the crowd with his signature blend of humor and warmth. But standing at the end of the Rodriguez family podium was someone who would change everything. Marcus Rodriguez looked older than his 14 years. While his cousins and aunts celebrated each correct answer with typical family enthusiasm, Marcus stood quietly, checking an old flip phone every few minutes. His posture was different from other teenage contestants. Where most kids his age bounced with nervous energy, Marcus carried himself with the weight of someone who'd grown up too fast. During family introductions, Steve had noticed him immediately. There was something about the way Marcus's eyes constantly scanned the studio, as if calculating how much time this was taking, how much money he was losing by being here. "And who do we have here?" Steve had asked, kneeling down to Marcus's level, as he always did with younger contestants. "I'm Marcus," he had replied, his voice steady but distant. "Marcus, 14 years old, right? What grade are you in, son?" Marcus had hesitated then, looking at his Aunt Rosa with an expression that seemed to ask permission to answer. I don't go to school anymore, Mr. Harvey." The studio audience had let out a surprised murmur, but Steve's smile never wavered. "Oh, you finished early? You one of those smart kids who graduated young?" "No, sir," Marcus had said quietly. I have other responsibilities." Something in his tone had made Steve linger a moment longer than usual, but the show had to go on. Now, 3 rounds into the game, that moment was about to explode into something none of them were prepared for. The Rodriguez family was doing well, leading by 30 points heading into the 4th round. Steve was in his element, making jokes about Aunt Rosa's surprisingly competitive streak and Cousin Miguel's tendency to overthink simple questions. The energy was exactly what producers loved. Authentic family dynamics with just enough competitiveness to keep viewers engaged. But during the 4th round, everything changed. The category was things teenagers do after school. It was Marcus's turn at the podium, brought up by his cousin Maria, who had gestured for him to take her place. Steve walked over to the family podium, microphone in hand, ready to have some fun with the youngest contestant of the day. "All right, Marcus, you ready for this one? This should be easy for you, man. Things teenagers do after school." Marcus stepped closer to the microphone. The studio lights seemed to illuminate something painful in his expression as he processed the question. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weariness that no 14-year-old should possess. "Go to work." The answer registered on the board at number 6, worth 8 points. The Rodriguez family celebrated, but Marcus wasn't looking at the board. He was checking his phone again, and Steve could see anxiety creeping across his young face. "Marcus," Steve said, his comedian instincts kicking in, "you checking on your girlfriend or something? We got you worried about missing something." It was meant to be a light moment, the kind of teenage ribbing that usually got laughs. Instead, Marcus looked up at Steve with eyes that held too much responsibility, too much worry. "I'm not supposed to be here this long, Mr. Harvey. I should be at work right now." The studio audience began to quiet, sensing something deeper than normal teenage concerns. Steve's smile faded slightly. "Work? What kind of work you do, son?" "I deliver groceries in the morning, work at the auto shop after lunch, and clean offices at night. I'm missing my afternoon shift right now." The silence that followed was deafening. Steve Harvey, who had built a career on quick wit and perfect timing, found himself completely off script. This wasn't teenage drama. This was something much more serious. "Marcus," Steve said, his voice now stripped of all performance, "why are you working 3 jobs at 14 years old?" Marcus looked at his Aunt Rosa, then back at Steve. The studio had gone completely quiet. Even the producers in the booth had stopped their usual chatter. Because someone has to take care of my little brothers and sister. My mom died 2 years ago, and my dad, he started drinking after that. He can't work anymore, so it's up to me. The words hung in the studio air like smoke from a fire. Nobody wanted to acknowledge. Steve Harvey had hosted thousands of shows, met countless families, heard every kind of story television could produce. But this was different. This was a child carrying the weight of an entire family on shoulders that should have been worried about homework and video games. Behind the scenes, a producer made a decision that would define this moment. Keep the cameras rolling. Let America see this. Marcus, Steve said, setting down his cards and walking closer to the boy. How old are your brothers and sister? Isabella is 6, the twins Diego and Carlos are 8, and baby Sophia is 3. And you're taking care of all of them? Yes, sir. I make about $400 a week between all my jobs. It's enough for rent and food, but barely. Steve's expression had completely transformed. This wasn't the entertainer Steve Harvey anymore. This was Steve Harvey, the father, the man who understood what it meant to sacrifice for family. Son, when do you sleep? I get maybe 4 hours a night. But it's okay, Mr. Harvey. My family needs me. The studio audience was openly emotional now. Several women in the front row were crying. Men were shaking their heads in disbelief and admiration. But Steve wasn't finished asking questions. Marcus, what happened to school? I had to drop out last year. I couldn't work enough hours and go to school. My brothers and sister needed food more than I needed algebra. That's when Steve Harvey did something unprecedented. He turned to address the entire studio, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. Ladies and gentlemen, I need everyone to understand what we're witnessing here. This 14-year-old young man has been forced to become a father, a mother, and a provider. He's sacrificed his childhood, his education, his future to keep his family together. The applause that began was unlike anything typically heard in a game show studio. It wasn't entertainment applause. It was recognition, respect, and heartbreak, all rolled into one. But Steve held up his hand for silence. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. When was the last time you did something just because you wanted to? When was the last time you played a game, watched a movie, just been a kid? Marcus thought for a long moment, his young face scrunched in concentration. I don't remember, Mr. Harvey. Maybe before Mom died. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of people crying throughout the studio. Steve Harvey knelt down in front of Marcus, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. Marcus, what's your dream? If you could do anything in the world, what would it be? I want to be an engineer. I want to build bridges. But that's just a dream now. Dreams don't feed babies. Behind the scenes, Steve made a decision that would shatter every television protocol. He pulled his cell phone from his jacket pocket. Marcus, what's the name of the auto shop where you work? Tony's Auto Repair on 5th Street. Why? Steve was already dialing. Because this ends today. The studio watched in complete silence as Steve made a phone call that would change a child's life. Hello, is this Tony? This is Steve Harvey from Family Feud. I have one of your employees here, Marcus Rodriguez. Yes, 14 years old. Sir, I need you to understand something. This child should be in school, not working for you. The conversation continued for several minutes. Steve's voice grew firmer with each exchange. Tony, I appreciate that you've helped him, but I'm telling you right now, Marcus will not be coming back to work for you. Not tomorrow, not ever. He's 14 years old. When Steve hung up, he immediately dialed another number. Hello, is this Rodriguez Grocery on Pine Street? This is Steve Harvey. Yes, the TV guy. I need to speak to whoever employs Marcus Rodriguez. The same conversation played out 2 more times. Steve methodically called each of Marcus's employers, informing them that their 14-year-old employee would not be returning. But that wasn't all. Steve turned to address the studio audience directly. Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is a failure of every system that's supposed to protect children. This young man shouldn't be working 3 jobs. He should be playing basketball, doing homework, worrying about acne, not whether his baby sister has formula. He walked back to Marcus, who was standing at the podium with tears streaming down his face. Marcus, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You are not responsible for being the adult in your family. You're 14 years old. you should be worried about 14-year-old things. But, Mr. Harvey, who's going to take care of my brothers and sister? Who's going to pay the rent? Steve reached into his jacket and pulled out his personal business card. Son, you just met a whole room full of people who care about you, and I promise you this, your family is going to be taken care of. But you're going back to school. What happened next defied every game show rule ever written. Steve turned to the studio audience and made an announcement that would change everything. I need everyone in this studio to understand what we're going to do. We're going to make sure Marcus gets to be a kid again. We're going to make sure his family is taken care of. And we're going to show him that he's not alone in this world. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Audience members began pulling out their wallets, their checkbooks, their phones to make online donations. But Steve wasn't finished. He took off his suit jacket, the same jacket he wore for every taping, and wrapped it around Marcus's shoulders. Marcus, this jacket has been with me through thousands of shows. It's seen families win and lose, celebrate and cry. But today, it's going home with someone who taught me what real courage looks like. As the jacket settled around Marcus's thin frame, Steve knelt down once more. Son, I want you to promise me something. Promise me you'll go back to school. Promise me you'll let adults handle adult problems. Promise me you'll remember what it feels like to be 14. Marcus looked up at Steve, tears flowing freely now. But what about my family? Your family is going to be fine, because now they don't just have you taking care of them. They have all of us. Steve stood up and addressed the cameras directly. To everyone watching at home, this young man represents thousands of children in America who are forced to grow up too fast. Children who should be learning multiplication tables, but are instead learning how to survive. We can do better. We have to do better. The episode aired exactly as it happened 6 weeks later. The response was unprecedented. Within 24 hours of the episode airing, Marcus's story had raised over $2 million in donations. Legal aid organizations stepped forward to help with his father's addiction treatment. Local politicians used Marcus's story to push for stronger child labor enforcement. Educational foundations offered full scholarships not just for Marcus, but for other children in similar situations. But perhaps most importantly, Marcus went back to school. 3 months after the taping, he was enrolled in a special program that allowed him to catch up on the education he'd missed. His siblings were placed in a temporary care program that kept the family together while his father received treatment. Steve Harvey didn't just stop at the television moment. His foundation worked with local organizations to create a support network around the Rodriguez family. Marcus received tutoring, counseling, and for the first time in 2 years, the chance to just be a kid. A year later, Marcus sent Steve a photo. It showed him in a school basketball uniform, holding a trophy, surrounded by teammates his own age. The note that came with it read, "Mr. Harvey, this is what 14 looks like. Thank you for giving me back my childhood." Steve Harvey learned something that day that changed how he views every contestant, every story, every moment he spends in front of those cameras. He learned that sometimes entertainment isn't about making people laugh. Sometimes it's about making people see. Sometimes it's about stopping everything to make sure a child gets the childhood they deserve. The jacket that Steve gave Marcus became a symbol of hope for families across America facing impossible circumstances. It represented the moment when one person's decision to care changed everything. Marcus graduated high school with honors 2 years early and is now studying engineering at university on a full scholarship. His siblings are healthy, his father is sober, and the family is together. But perhaps most importantly, Marcus learned something that day that no textbook could have taught him. He learned that he wasn't alone. That there were people in the world who would stop everything, break every rule, and move mountains to make sure a child got to be a child. Steve Harvey still keeps Marcus's photo on his desk, not as a reminder of good television, but as a reminder of what happens when you choose to see the humanity in every story that walks across your stage. Because sometimes a 14-year-old boy working 3 jobs isn't a heartwarming story about responsibility. Sometimes it's a tragedy that requires adults to step up and do what adults are supposed to do. Protect children, all children, even when they're trying so hard to protect everyone else. The stolen childhood was returned that day, and in its place grew something even more powerful, the understanding that every child deserves the chance to dream, to learn, to fail, to succeed, and most importantly, to be young while they still can. Because that's what love looks like. That's what community means. And that's what happens when someone decides that a child's future is more important than any television show could ever be.